Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. Time for the Bronx Buzz. This is Bronx Night's program. We talk to reporters, writers, editors, journalists, people putting stuff out in the borough of the Bronx so you can know what's happening. You can know what they're thinking about. In our second segment, we're going to the Bronx River Arts Center for a wonderful exhibit that is really about us in the Bronx. But right now, a somewhat bittersweet segment. Sweet because we're going to say hello to Aliya Schneider once again. Nice to see you, Aliya.
Nice to see you.
But the news is people may know Aliya Schneider has been a reporter and writer and excellent journalist for the Bronx Times, but she has now left and she's gone on to other things. So why don't you briefly tell? We're gonna go into your last story written for the Bronx Times, but tell us a little bit about what you're doing, when you left, and where you're going to be, and what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, so I very recently left the Bronx Times. I joined the politics and governing team at the Philadelphia Inquirer. I just started yesterday, which was Monday, October 23rd.
Right, we're recording this. We should say on the 24th.
Yeah. And so I'm going to be on a team of politics reporters covering kind of general politics in the Philly region, and then also covering the 2024 election across the state of Pennsylvania.
Are you going to be moving out there? Now, you said you hadn't moved yet, but I didn't ask. So you're going to be fully leaving and getting out there?
I will be. I will be. Not yet, but I will be moving there.
All right, she's going to be leaving. We're going to ask you a little bit about the Bronx Times and some of the other things, and then things that you're going to be doing. But let's just talk about the final, the final piece that you wrote for the Bronx Times. The piece was, and it's been written up in a couple of places. Ex-Santos treasurer Nancy Marks has ties to Christy Marmorato's Bronx GOP campaign. This anybody tied to Santos right now is you raise your question marks, but in particular, this particular treasurer is in some trouble as well. So why don't you kind of recast the story that you wrote for the final one for the Bronx Times?
So I will say that I technically do have another article that will be coming out that hasn't come out yet.
So it's not fully the last one. All right.
The last one, but the last one right now. But yeah, so Nancy Marks was a treasurer for George Santos, and she fairly recently pled guilty to charges related to the campaign and kind of fraud. And so she admitted to kind of creating fake contributions, using people's names without their permission, and also creating a fake loan, which she said she did with George Santos. And then shortly after she was indicted, Santos was given, I think, 10 more charges. That
Yeah, partially based on, yeah, we don't have to review George Santos' legal issues. But as I understand it, she faces like real jail time for this. I mean, potentially, up to 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, I had the specific number in the article for what the plea deal said,
Right.
but yeah, it's serious stuff, and this is specifically relating to her work on George Santos's campaign, and so kind of how that relates to the Bronx is that she worked on Christy Marmorato's campaign pretty early on, and Christy is the GOP nominee for the general
Right.
election this
And
year.
and I should mention on our, program, Bronx Talk, beginning Tuesday the 31st, you'll be able to see the debate between, Christy Marmorato and, the Democrat incumbent, Marjorie Velasquez. That's just a free plug for me.
And that's in City Council District 13.
13, of course, in the East Bronx. Yeah.
But something worth noting is that Nancy Marks also worked on the campaign of George Havronic, who was the main GOP challenger in the primary to Christie. And so they both told me that their time with her was pretty short lived for different reasons. And that is supported by documentation. She was on their campaigns only for the early parts. But I
Right.
thought it was a little interesting that she was working on both of their campaigns at the same time when they were primary opponents.
Yeah, so, even aside from any fraud or any other allegations, that in itself is interesting, let's put it that way. Imagine somebody, working on 2 campaigns of competing candidates, that being the treasurer, what information goes back, it just seems, I hate to say it, it's very George Santos-like.
Yeah, I heard mixed things about that in terms of what people thought of that. Mike Randino, who's the head of he's a chair of the Bronx
Right.
GOP and also happens to be Christy Marmorato's brother. He told me that Nancy was really the go-to treasurer for the GOP candidates in the area, and that anytime someone would ask Mike for a recommendation for a treasurer, he would recommend her. And George Havernack told me that um, that Mike referred Nancy
To
or
him.
yeah, to
Yeah, it's just very strange, that's all, and maybe she's gonna be taking the fall for some. I mean, I don't know. We certainly are not in a position to judge, but it especially going into, what is a competitive campaign and will be a competitive election day for the 2 of them, for Marjorie and for Christie. It is, I don't know. It just doesn't sit right. It's not the way things should go because, who knows how far those tentacles go. It's a little bit odd. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It just
I mean, and so the 2 candidates had different reasons actually that they gave me for why they dropped her as their treasurer. For George, it was when he found out that Nancy was working for Christie, he
yeah,
didn't like
yeah, of course.
her
That's
working on
totally
any
crazy.
campaign. And for Christie, she told me it was once she started seeing Nancy in the news, kind of getting into this scandal with George Santos and getting her family members were getting phone calls from reporters asking about her connection. That's when she knew, okay, I want to cut ties
Time
with
to go.
they actually the different reasons.
Listen, you have just been a great reporter. This is just one example of the many things you've covered. What's it been like? First of all, how long have you been at? Or were you at the Bronx Times? And what was it like? What's your? We were going to give you a chance to do your like little Bronx farewell, so to speak.
Yeah, so I was on staff for about 2 years. I started as a contributor in the summer of 2021, and then I joined full time at the very beginning of November 2021, right when election night, if not my first night, was one of my first nights. And I started as a digital editor, where I was really
Well,
helping
that's right. Yeah.
everything behind the scenes, but also regularly reporting. And my heart's really in reporting. As great of an experience it was helping with everything and learning about everything.
Right.
So I switched into a full-time reporter role a little later on,
Mhm.
what I was doing when I
But
left.
listen, the one thing that, we have to credit you with, your work, everything you wrote about was thorough, and you really I know that you take it very seriously, and you really, whether it's investigative or, just something maybe a little simpler, you really, gave us everything that was out there, and I will tell you, I appreciated all of that. And how do you look back at, your work in the Bronx? I mean, I'm going to guess what the best, craziest story that you did, but before we do that, just give us a little bit about covering the Bronx. What's it like to cover the Bronx?
I mean, it was an amazing experience. I got to cover so many different things and speak to so many different people and just covering the whole borough with a small team. We all got to do so many different stories, whether it was a Legionnaires outbreak or local politics or reporting on the ferry, and just so many different things. I mean, I can go on and on and on. And so I really got to just learn about so many different things, and how they impact communities, and how the actions of elected officials and city agencies affect day-to-day people's lives and their day-to-day.
Yeah.
And so now I'm going to be on a politics team, so I'm going to be more focused on one kind of reporting, and that's a great experience in itself. And I really found my love for politics reporting through the Bronx
For the
Times.
Bronx? I don't know if that's good news or bad news for the Bronx, but, yeah, at least there was something that you could report on. I wanna ask you about, the Bruckner rezoning. To me, that, and then all the things that happened with that. And of course, we're going to have to bring that up, I'm sure, in the debate between the two candidates. But that to me was maybe the wildest, the busiest, the most difficult story, because there was so many passionate angles to it. Do I have that right? Is that maybe the most memorable story of them all? If I'm wrong, you could say it's okay.
It's interesting because if you were to ask me about one story, I wouldn't
You
say
wouldn't have said
Bruckner
that one. That's the one I remember.
because Bruckner was so many different stories, and so it was very
Mm,
incremental, I felt. Like, I countless stories. I wrote countless stories on that rezoning proposal, and so
right.
there wasn't like one Bruckner story I wrote, and I'm like, that's the best thing I did at the Bronx Times. It was really this commitment that we had to covering this from pretty early on, and then once it was in the city council and these other bigger outlets in the city were they kind of swooped in and they were all covering Bruckner, and a lot of these places were linking to our coverage and they were looking to our coverage to really get the details. And I think, as you said, I tend to be pretty thorough. And so I was able to kind of get the kind of microscopic details that these other outlets may not necessarily have had the background to get. So I think the experience on reporting on Bruckner in itself was a really great experience.
Yeah.
But it was this kind of gradual thing over time
So
that shows the value of local reporting.
so before we run out of time, if so, now I will ask you that question. Which was the best story you did, the most interesting story, the one that was most compelling?
So this is a really hard question, and it would
Oh, okay.
like all the time, but because I'm going into a politics beat, the story that comes to mind is when, and I'm going to try to very quickly summarize this, when Miguel Dyer resigned as treasurer, another treasurer story of Bernadette Ferrara's campaign.
Oh.
Because it was a very personal story. It had to do with remarks that she said about gay marriage on your show.
Oh, yes, yes, yes,
And
yes.
Miguel really trusted me with his story, and I mean, there was a lot that we talked about. I mean, it's a semi long
So
article, but there's
we're gonna run out of time, and as you ran out of time, and listen, Aliya, we hope that maybe we can find a way to bring you back in and tell us about what you're doing. We hope you will continue to stay in touch, and we wish you all good luck. And remember the great people of the Bronx, and be inspired by us in everything that you do.
thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Great. It's always been a pleasure to have you, and I already miss reading you in the Bronx Times. So there it is. Aliya Schneider, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your great work in the borough of the Bronx. We're going to take a short break, ladies and gents, and then when we come back, we're going right to the Bronx River Arts Center, and you're going to love this exhibit. It's about you, and it's about me. It's about the Bronx. We'll be right back.